Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. I'm Sebastian Belfanti, oh, the director here at the West End Museum. It's great to see some of your faces after being closed for such a long time. We at the museum are really happy to have the opportunity to partner with Laura, Simmons archivist Jason Wood, all their awesome students, and the rest of the Simmons staff on the Learn from Our Neighbors exhibit. It's been really exciting to host an online exhibit for the first time, and we're looking forward to hosting the exhibit in person somewhere down the line. I also want to make sure to acknowledge Mass Humanities for their support of the museum during the COVID-19 pandemic. It'd be a lot harder for us to be hosting this event without them. Now I'll hand things over to, Laura. Jason's having some audio issues. Note that we'll have time at the end of the event and possibly in between students if needed for any questions you might have. But please feel free to post questions in the chat throughout. I'll be keeping an eye on them and we'll make sure to cover as many as possible. Thanks all for your support of the museum and for participating in the community. And we'll look forward to seeing you in person before too long.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the West End Museum, to Sebastian Belfanti for inviting us today. I'm Laura Prieto. I'm a professor and chair of public humanities at the Eiffel College, Simmons University. And it's been my great honor and pleasure to have been working with these 12 undergraduate students from Simmons. Some of them are alums now, but they were students throughout the year when we were working on this project, doing research and curating the digital exhibit that you can see the screenshot of the entry page here, Learned from Our Neighbors, Stories from the Elizabeth Peabody House. So this started with a collaboration between me and Jason Wood, the university archivist who's in the room, and Megan Doran, who works in community engagement at Simmons. We won a grant from the Council of Independent Colleges, so I want to acknowledge them also. They have an initiative called Humanities Research for the Public Good. And thanks to some funding from them, we organized ourselves into a weekly seminar with these students that you can see in the next slide, meeting in the Simmons University Archives reading room. And there you see some of us at work, nice cozy reading room, which was a really new experience for some of the students who had never worked in these kinds of papers and archives before. You can see some of the gray boxes on the tables. Those are the papers of Eva Whiting White, who some of you here might know of. She was a pioneering social worker, an alum of Simmons College, perhaps the first social work graduate in the world, with a degree in social work in the world, and a longtime director of the Elizabeth Peabody House in the West End. So we started off by working in the university archives. We also partnered with the Boston City Archives, did some additional research there, and they published on their website a whole series of blog posts written by the students that are fantastic, and I encourage you to check them out if you haven't read them yet. But early on in the fall, it was early October, I believe, we went on our first field trip. We went to the West End Museum, and that visit really ignited the students' passion and understanding of the West End, what it had been like to live there before its demolition. Meeting the folks at the West End Museum, including our docent was Bruce Guarini. It just really injected great energy into the group of students, and it ended up leading to this wonderful new community partnership between Simmons and the West End Museum. That is what brings us here today. So as Sebastian said, we're hoping there will be an in-person exhibit as well, but we do have this digital exhibit to offer you and to talk about with you today. We are thinking about this partnership with the West End Museum almost as a kind of reincarnation of the relationship that Eva Whiting White had with the West End when she was directing the Elizabeth Peabody House and kind of bridging that distance between Simmons and the West End. And just as Eva Whiting White learned from her neighbors generations ago in doing that work, we have learned a lot from our neighbors in the West End and at the West End Museum. So I'm going to turn things over. This is really the students' show. They did the hard work of the research and the curation, and they're really proud of the digital exhibit that, again, they're the ones who designed and created it. So we have some accompanying slides that feature favorite items from the digital exhibit. We hope you'll go explore it on your own, and the address will appear again at the end. We can also stick it in the chat. But we thought the most fun thing to do would be for you to hear some behind the scenes from them, some favorite items and reflections on the experience. So we have a whole lineup for you, and we do welcome, as Sebastian said, any questions in the chat, and we'll probably pause between students to see if there are any questions that we can field then. Thank you.
So this was sorry, I had laptop issues, so I missed our introduction. But I'm Mavis Reardon. I use she, her, hers. And this was the piece that I selected because it really spoke to me. And it didn't make it into the digital exhibit because it wasn't scanned in time. It was something I really took to because it exemplified just the different particulars that the West End the Elizabeth Peabody House was trying to capture for the West End. There are little notes about athletics, basket weaving, brass making, those kind of things. And they show the care and detail that went into creating these events to try and engage the community. I also really like the ABC's format. I worked at a children's library all through high school, and so that's just very familiar to me. And to find it with something dated 1909 was just very novel, and also like, wow, I'm glad that this is a template that we keep going with because I personally really enjoy it. Yeah, so that was of my favorites from the collection. And I'm sorry, is there more we're supposed to be adding on to about our experiences now, or is that later? Okay, well, I'll talk on, I guess, what I took from this project, which was intention this summer working with Grant to stay and help the West End Museum curate this exhibit and present it. And so for me, this was a really big step forward in thinking about career choices and what I was really enjoying and what I was getting from my studies. And so I loved the hands-on part of it, and I was very excited to do the work over the summer, but it's almost more exciting to figure out ways to try and make it work going into this new normal that we have, and understanding how we can just adapt museums and museum work and archival materials to now. And so the question in the chat, the purpose of the ABC document. So this document was used and cataloged with a couple other things that were intended to show, we had sectioned in the archives to show the ways that the house was engaging with its members. And so this was also with some of the different flyers that would be pushing advertisements of like, come endorse the new building or see the different plays. And they were also, I believe the note on the top explains the two dates it was used, 1914, I think, and 1909. I'm not sure, and it's quite small, but it is, yeah, it really is just for us to understand the way that they were advertising their purposes and their activities, but also something within the house that was cataloging what they did and advertise those activities to the people. I think that's a bit of a runaround explanation. I apologize for that. I haven't been doing my research too recently with the summer and all. So I'll pass it along to whoever is presenting next.
Oh, hi everyone. My name's Lily Thorne. I use she, her, hers. I'm a recent alum of Simmons. And I was one of the fellows who worked on this project. I was hired by the Council of Independent Colleges to work on this and kind of help students who had not really done archival research as much before, because I had a little bit of experience. So I was really grateful for that opportunity. And so I chose a picture from an Elizabeth Peabody House pet show. It also appeared in my blog post that I wrote on the Boston City Archives, and I think the reasons I chose it are pretty obvious. It's just really, really cute. But more than that, I think it just shows kind of all the fun that was had at the Elizabeth Peabody House, and just kind of how it contrasted with the kind of perception of the West End as a whole. Outsiders kind of viewed the neighborhood negatively, like as a place that might have been more of a slum, but obviously the insiders did not see it that way. The West Enders did not see it that way at all. They saw it as a place of joy and their home, and we just have this adorable dog to show that joy, and this little girl who is so happy to be there. And so it's one of my favorites, and it really shows that there's so much more than meets the eye with the West End and the Elizabeth Peabody House. And I apologize, I'm sharing my screen and I'm kind of Zoom illiterate, and so I don't know how to see the chat. So if there are questions, if someone could read them to me, that'd be delightful. I think the thing that meant the most to me with this project was getting to work on it as a team. I've said it before and I'll say it again, history is often a solo endeavor. While I was working on this project, I was also working on my senior thesis, which was a very solo endeavor. No one else was working on it. I was working on it with Laura, so she kind of knew what was going on, but like I was the only one who was really in the thick of it. And so getting to work on this project with a team was just so incredible, to like have all sorts of people like who are just as passionate about the material as you are, and you can bounce ideas off of each other. And I just don't think that our project would have yielded the incredible result if someone was doing it by themselves. Like, everyone had their different strengths. Some people were more excited to be writing for the exhibit. Some people were more excited to be constructing the exhibit. And so we just kind of put our pieces together and really did some excellent work. And I really could not be more proud of what we came up with, even through the challenge of moving to all remote learning. So I think that's all I have to say other than questions. But we can also wait and I can just pass it along.
There is a question, Lily, that asks, Sylvia asks, what was the article about, this one with the picture?
Oh, the blog post that I wrote. It was called More Than Meets the Eye. Stories. I don't remember what the rest of the title of my blog post was, but it was about More Than Meets the Eye, and how the picture that I had originally chosen, our assignment was to select a photo from the Boston City Archives and use that as our going off point for our blog post. And the picture I had chosen was just the facade of the Elizabeth Peabody House, which is really boring looking. It's just like a plain brick wall. And so just looking at it, you would never know like all of the life that's inside of it. And so that was the gist of my article, was how the Elizabeth Peabody House kind of served as a microcosm for the West End as a whole, with the More Than Meets the Eye idea. And there are some other fun pictures in that blog post. One of them is actually going to be in our slideshow from Sarah. It's with our science section. And so you'll get to see more fun things. So. And I'll turn it over to our next speaker.
So hello, my name is Katie. I use she, her, hers. I am a rising senior at Simmons, studying history and IT. And this is my favorite piece. It actually did make it to the digital exhibit. It is a program for one of the inter-settlement concerts from 1910. So the reason this is my favorite is because for one thing, I have a very strong music background and I love music, but I also like how even early on it showed like the greater community of settlement houses in Boston and how the West End was involved in that. There were actually several programs like this. I had the music folders to research originally, and throughout the years there were several different events with all the settlement houses. So this is the only one that made it in, but they're all my favorite, but this is the one that we showed. And
could you tell us a little bit about, or, well, Katie, do you want to take that from Christine? What is a settlement house?
sure. Well, a settlement house is a community house where a lot of programs were put on. I want to say primarily for lower income and immigrant communities in the late 19th century and early 20th century. And there were plenty in Boston, as you can see all the names of the different houses, but they were community houses, basically. I don't know.
Yeah, there were more than a dozen settlement houses in the West End, and they, they started as a movement to sort of accommodate new, like really recent immigrants into the U.S. They were originally part of kind of Americanization, but in places like the West End after 1906-ish, when immigration started to really slow down, they became real community centers. So by the time the West End was torn down, and mostly during the period that the students were looking at, they were like places where your basketball club would be, or where you take art lessons and things like that. They were just sort of like little mini YMCA's. And then what is a PickABack song? Maybe Katie can answer that.
I think Laura just did. Yeah, it was a collection of songs for children. So all of the choruses and orchestras in the Elizabeth Peabody House and then in these concerts were for the kids. It was one way they got music lessons and got to engage with that part of themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Feuerstein. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a recent Simmons alum. I graduated in 2020. I chose, for my favorite parts, were the poems of Norman Goldman, who was an 11-year-old. A few of these are a little bit, they're within the like years surrounding 1932. So he's, like 11, 12, 13. And he wrote like 30 or 40 poems, seemingly kind of just for his own, artistic or creative process. And they just span a huge range of topics. He has ones about, we have one here about like his beetle that he found in the woods, and then one about the Lindbergh baby. So it's just like real range of of events and topics that he was kind of showing through his eyes as a kid in this time. And there's also one, I thought I had to show the one about the Peabody House itself. Very sweet, sort of just like, obviously this is where he kind of was meeting a lot of friends, and he was on he was part of the science club and all this sort of thing. So where he experienced a lot of really good times. What else was there? Things that I got from this project. I absolutely loved being part of this project. It's like probably one of my favorite things I did at Simmons. It was really great being able to work with everybody and just like, you'd see each other in the hallway and you'd be like, did you do this thing? Did you see that thing? Let me show you this thing, like all of this stuff. And it was just so great to be able to talk to everyone and be able to learn not only through your own sort of process, but through everybody else's. Like, someone would do something some way and you'd be like, oh, that's great. I didn't even think about that. I'm going to try it that way. So there were just, so many good things about it. I don't really have much else. If there's any questions, then I can answer those. Oh, I did want to mention, I did try to find Norman Goldman to see if he became a poet or something. I couldn't find him anywhere. So that was kind of sad, but what can you do?
This is mine. My name is Maddie. I use she, her pronouns, and I am also a recent alum of Simmons. And for my favorite item, I guess, I chose the poster for the science fair that they held at the Elizabeth Peabody House. I just think this is really cool. I worked a lot on the science section, just going through the photographs and writing captions and stuff like that. That was one area that I really kind of honed in on, just sort of through fact of it had to get done. And I found myself really enjoying looking at the pictures and the reports of the programs and things like that that they had there. Because you might notice at the top of the poster there, it says that they have exhibits, short talks, magic experiments, movies, tableau, etc. And I really liked that they sort of had like a mixing of like science as we might think of it traditionally, with like theater and art and things like that. And it was all sort of melded together into different programs, and they had a ton of different programs within the house. They had like an astronomy club, a natural history club, photography club, all that kind of stuff, so that if kids were into science, they could sort of take whatever path they wanted to and learn whatever they were most interested in. And it was just really cool. It felt like a really fun part. You could tell that the kids that were involved in it, from the writings and pictures that they left, were really engaged with it, and that it was a really positive experience that a lot of them had. And I just thought that was really cool. And I guess to sort of speak to what I got from the project too, just to sort of echo, I think, things that have already been said, the sense of community as we were working on it was really cool. I joined the project in its second semester, but it felt like I had never, it never felt, I was sort of brought into it very quickly and sort of given opportunities to continue, going in different directions and things like that. And it was just really great to get to work with people and bounce ideas off of everybody else and see what we could do together and sort of collaborate on that. It was just a really fun experience that I hadn't had before, and I miss it a lot. So yeah.
So I am going to speak to this photo. My name is Sarah. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am a rising senior at Simmons, and I'm studying history and journalism. And this is our mascot, our de facto mascot, Chemical Man. We love him. But basically why we love him so much, it's really cool. Like Maddie said, the science department, or the science club, was like a huge, huge part of the Elizabeth Peabody House, especially for younger people who were boys and girls who wanted to learn more about science. And this photo, Chemical Man, was built by the science club. The student that's holding him, his name is Hyman Gordon. And he was presented by the Elizabeth Peabody House Science Club at the 1939 World's Fair. So it's very cool that they were able to go there and kind of show what they had been working on. And I know that there are a lot of like newspaper sources, like the Boston Globe and stuff like that, that mentioned the EPH Science Club, like they're doing this and they went here and they did all these different things. So it was definitely a really big part of the community, and we love Chemical Man because he's a little scary looking, but he does, what he was meant to do was show how the digestive system works, and like a bunch of teenagers put him together. So yeah, very cool. If anyone has any questions about Chemical Man, I'm happy to answer them.
Hello, I'm Maddie Short. I am a rising junior at Simmons, and I use she, her pronouns. I am studying history. And I had so many favorite pieces from this project and from this exhibit. but I decided to show this page from a 1930 Elizabeth Peabody House broadcaster, which was their kind of in-house newspaper that was sent to all of the residents and participants within the house. And this article was particularly interesting to me because it is a reflection on the house's position within the West End as well as how it was changing. And 1930 was a commemorative year for Boston as the tercentenary, and Eva Whiting White was on some of the committees for the City of Boston celebrations. So I believe she wrote these articles, and it reflects on how the city was changing around them and everything with she writes about the widening streets and new buildings that are coming up and development and everything. And of course, the West End was torn down by urban renewal just 30 years later. So it is kind of a premonition for the residents of the West End, unfortunately, that they had already seen all of these changes coming and that it was taken away from them. But other parts of the broadcaster that I found quite interesting were all about arts and music sections, and they had all of their athletics within the broadcaster with scores and talking about inter-settlement meets and all of the things that they were doing all together within themselves and with the community. So I found these publications to be really, really interesting. And we had so many of them from the early 1920s through the 1930s as well, between our collection at Simmons and the West End Museum. So they were really insightful into the life within the Elizabeth Peabody House. I see a question in here. Mr. Lee, I believe I found that he was a music teacher, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
And I guess I can pipe in here again. This is Laura Prieto. Thank you to all the students who are eager to take any more questions or just have a conversation with you about this whole project. We can only give you a little taste of it, picking one item each because it's a really rich website. Ironically, no one chose a photo of Eva Whiting White herself, although she is certainly prominently featured in the digital exhibit. We also didn't want it to be just about her. It was really important to us that this exhibit reflect the whole life of the West End. As we've been talking about, the settlement, a meeting house for lots of different people of different ages, with different interests, different ethnicities, and we're happy, again, to welcome any questions or reflections or memories that you all might have about the Elizabeth Peabody House. This was certainly a great adventure for us to learn about something. It was unlike any other class. There wasn't this body of knowledge that I, as the professor, was going to, just dole out to the students in pieces. It was really an adventure of discovery for all of us together. So thank you, and we hope to hear from you and get a conversation going with the rest of our time together now.
Great. How did, so we have a question, how did the project change the students' views of Boston? We also have at least one attendee of the Elizabeth Peabody House in the room, so that's great.
Well, I can speak to how it changed sort of my view.
Great.
Of course, we know that cities, especially, bigger cities like Boston is, are changing, but sometimes it's hard to see it because it happens more gradually, like a store closes down your street or something like that and something new gets put in. There's stuff like that. But it really casts a light on how, things like gentrification and urban renewal can be, really damaging to a community, and how, you know, not always all, you know, not all the decisions that are made by, you know, cities are, you know, they're not for the best, you know, some of the time. Like, it's really, you know, it casts a light on how long gentrification and that kind of thing has been going on. It's, you know, it's not a new thing. So that was something that I really was thinking about a lot.
I can also speak to this a little bit, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think it really changed my view on like Boston's history, because I think a lot of the time, especially me, like, because I'm studying American history and I'm from Massachusetts, we get kind of caught up in, you know, the city on a hill, like the Boston is it's liberal, it's progressive, all this stuff. And when you look at, you know, diverse neighborhoods like the West End that were taken down without any, you know, without any asking the inhabitants if they wanted that to happen, it kind of makes you look at Boston city government in a different light, and kind of how, like, now we look at the North End as one of the, you know, jewel of Boston, and a place where you can go to experience some history, and it just makes you think about, like, well, why couldn't that have happened with the West End? So I think it definitely kind of, it changed my opinion on Boston history, kind of in a bad way, but more just understanding more accurately the full picture of Boston as a city and its history.
Great. Well, people maybe think of questions. Maybe one or two of you could speak to something that you found like especially surprising, or that you wouldn't have expected to find.
I'm not sure if I got my video working because my laptop's being a total brat right now. But one thing that I found really surprising, because I went in looking for street names that we found off a lot of the photographs and wanted to try and pinpoint where exactly the West End was in these different like locations people were talking about. When we came, our field trip to the museum, we had Bruce as our tour guide, and he was wonderful. But he kept using street names, and it was just so clear that that was the way that the city was, or the area was not so much divided, but understood and sort of mapped out. And so I found this one photo of like a garden plot, and it was, when I looked it up, in one of the parking lots like of the hospital. And so just seeing exactly where it changed. On our website, we have a slider image that goes between a view of Boston from, I'm not sure the exact date, but you can see where the West End is, and then one from, I believe, 2016 or 17, and you can see the major developments that have happened, how the coastline itself was even changed along the river, but also understand like what history like literally got pressed down, and understanding like how it can still be brought back, like getting to see the West End Museum and knowing that like, okay, these are the developments that have happened, but we can still like have this history. Like if we make that effort, we can hold on to it. And I think that's the really important part of this project. But when it comes to looking at Boston, it definitely made me question even more like what different things aren't actually acknowledged. Like there are plaques all around the city, and some of them, like you can see, some of them are ridiculously up high, like all those little things. And it's just like, what else is kind of missing? Like what else can we talk more about?
Yeah, actually, some of them have been removed in the West End too, which is an interesting dynamic. There are more than one rather significant West End place that was at one time acknowledged, and it is not anymore. I'll also use the opportunity of mentioning the maps to kind of plug not something that's really related to us directly, but the Norman Leventhal collection at the the Boston Public Library has a absolutely phenomenal collection of digitized maps of the West End, Boston at large, including insurance maps that include the owner of every building in the city for almost 50 years. So there's something that's worth exploring if you're interested in just seeing different streets in the neighborhood. Yeah, I see a question here on what are one or two key things that you want people to take away from the exhibit?
I know that when we were going and trying to decide what we wanted the theme of our exhibit to be, a lot of us landed on individual stories from the West End and from the Elizabeth Peabody House. And I think through that, we kind of got a picture of the West End and the Elizabeth Peabody House that was just so much greater than the narrative. I think if anyone knows anything about Boston's West End, I'm sure I don't have to speak on this to the participants in the room who have really fond memories of the West End from before its destruction, but the narrative that we hear of the West End is primarily on its ending. And I think that our exhibit shows that the West End was so much more than just the like really awful and really upsetting and angering like destruction of it. It was a place of like joy and happiness and home and family and like harmony despite all of the like demographic differences. And so I think through the individual stories we heard and learned of, we got such a like gorgeous narrative of this neighborhood that I think deserves to be told.
Great. So I'll just quickly answer. The Elizabeth Peabody House did serve some adults, but it was all the settlement houses were more focused on people who were like, you know, younger generally, but it provided important services for adults in the community as well, and some like secondary ongoing education kind of services. Okay, we're experiencing a moment of anti-immigrant sentiment in our nation right now. What lessons can we learn from from your new knowledge of the immigrant history in the West End?
I think that you can really take away how, you know, that this is a like the loss of the West End and, you know, the kind of amazing like melting pot of culture and, you know, like just, you know, a wide variety of experiences that people had is it's a really huge loss. And I think that it really kind of drives home the fact that having, you know, a wide variety of people living in one place doesn't breed, you know, hate or destruction or anger. It breeds creativity and, you know, like pursuit of knowledge and all of this sort of, and learning and understanding, you know, that sort of thing. So I think it really drives home the importance of having diverse communities, and really being open-hearted and welcoming to people, despite, you know, maybe you don't understand them, but being sort of still welcoming them into your community is really important.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. That's something I experience a lot with the neighborhood is just how kind of how much the pre-urban renewal West Enders valued the diversity in their community, and what they got out of it. Just that, you know, you'd have dinner with your downstairs neighbor or upstairs neighbor, and they cooked a different kind of food than your family did, and that's something that like they those of you who are here, you you know, repeat to me constantly is this like real value of that diversity within the community. I think we've answered what did you learn about the diversity and equity from this project. I don't know if anyone else wants to speak to that, but what do you think that Peabody House kind of added to the way that the West End kind of grew, the culture, how it connected those people, or it specifically the house?
I think one thing, or a bunch of things, of course, that I found about how the role of the Elizabeth Peabody House was to connect people of different cultures was a lot of their music programs and a lot of lectures as well. A lot of music programs, different ethnicities and cultural groups would form their own orchestra programs or music programs that reflected where they came from. So there was a Russian orchestra that was widely talked about within the publications that I was reading, and different choruses as well. And then they would host lectures as well from people in all different cultures. They had Chinese speakers at one point pretty early on, probably, I think, during a time when Chinese immigration was limited in the country, I think. And just a bunch of other things like that. And there were lots of quips and tales within within the papers about like the Italian girls learning to cook well, better than the American neighbors and things like that. And so there were so many groups that were open to everyone in the house, and they all got to share with each other. And I think that was really lovely.
Thanks. So I see one that came to me in a private message, but any of you learn anything about Leonard Nimoy's time at the EPH during your studies?
I think I saw his name on, I can't remember if it was the broadcaster or a different kind of more unofficial kind of publication from the EPH, but I think he was an editor of like a paper that some younger boys put together that we had seen at the West End Museum's archive. So he didn't come up too much, but he was there.
Yeah, and I know he spent most of his time as a participant at the West End House, but was a coach at the EPH for basketball. So okay, here's another one. How do you think that Eva herself influenced the Peabody House, how it worked, and how it impacted things outside of Boston, right? She was obviously active in the community, both inside and outside of the institution.
I can kind of talk about this a little bit. So I think kind of what Laura said at first, she was the first graduate from what is now the Simmons School of Social Work, but back then was the Boston School of Social Work, and perhaps one of the first people to hold a social work degree in the world. So I think she kind of brought that sort of community-based idea of and like education and training into the house. But another thing that I think is really important that we saw when looking through her correspondence was like how much she inspired not just the next generation of social workers, but the next one after that and the next one after that. Like we personally, in my correspondence letters, I would get all of these letters from people who say, either I went to the EPH and you inspired me to focus either on social work or another like community-based career, or people who had started as volunteers at the EPH were running their own settlement houses. So kind of sparking that passion for being community facing and working with the community, learning from their neighbors, that kind of attitude towards settlement houses. I think that was probably one of the biggest contributions she made to the house and how it impacted the West End.
Sure.
I think my camera is still down, but I'll also speak to the correspondence folders that I had. And they were all sectioned we got them alphabetically. And so the clump of people that I had their mail of, it was a lot of letters to Eva from former students that she had at Simmons who had reconnected with her in the EPH. There was one woman who I found records, like Eva had her in classes at Simmons, and then they later worked together at the EPH. And so I think also that connection with Simmons that she had was just important, both for us as a Simmons project and Simmons students, but understanding how she, as the first social work grad, was able to really inspire other people, not just to continue studying, but to actually go out and really practice and have a hands-on approach and holistically approach the way that settlement houses were going to be run as well, because this was a time when everyone was figuring it out, and throughout the country where we can see them popping up, they operate, while they have the same sort of template, in a very different way, depending on the communities that they are trying to serve and how much they want to branch out into the community or have the community reach to them. So I think Eva was very good at maintaining a good piece between settlement house and settlement worker, and keeping the community as her first focus.
Well, this is this came in as a comment, but I'd be interested to see, to hear if one of you could sort of just briefly describe sort of the process, your experience going from, you know, these individual boxes to a full exhibit, right? How that started, what the challenges were.
I mean, I can speak. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kate. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think this was the project was so new to all of us that it was a lot of workshopping as a group of trying to figure out what exhibits, like what we wanted them to be, like how to organize them. So we started with individual research and all our different folders and everything. And then we came together and planned out how we were going to have a digital exhibit. We were supposed to have some physical exhibits that are unfortunately not happening for a while because of the current state of the world. But we worked on paring down what information we wanted to share, and just like which exhibit would have what. So it was very top down. It was very like starting with a lot of information and like filtering through everything. So yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, like, of course we couldn't have done this without Prof. Prieto and Jason. Like, they really were our sort of like guiding, like our beacons through this. It's like you had all this stuff, but like honestly trying to get from those boxes to something that you can like show people and it's cohesive it's a lot, and we couldn't have done it without them.
All right, well, if there aren't any more questions, maybe before we wrap up, just because it occurred to me, Laura, maybe you could speak to a little bit of how these resources actually ended up at Simmons in the first place.
This is where I really need Jason to answer the question if his audio were working. This is how much I know, and maybe, Jason, I invite you to share any further details or corrections in the chat. But Eva Whiting White, who, as we said, had these strong connections to Simmons, she was a Simmons alum. She taught in what became the School of Social Work. She directed what became the School of Social Work. So she did arrange for a donation of some of her papers, and she collected a lot. Jason will know the exact scope of the collection. We had many boxes to choose from. She donated a set of papers a little bit earlier to the Schlesinger Library in Cambridge. And that has been used by a couple of people, even though she hasn't been written about a whole lot. And then when she died, she left the remainder of the papers that she had collected to the Simmons archives. And that's, as Jason referred to, the donation that came from her herself, and from her estate. It includes a diary, handwritten, actually 2 volumes of a diary that covered 10 years of her life. We had a lot of fun learning handwriting today in an age where I read all these, complaints about how children today are not learning cursive, and here is an application for knowing how to read cursive. Boxes of photographs, a lot of them are of the drama productions at the Playhouse. We didn't spot Leonard Nimoy in any of them, but I believe he was also active in the Playhouse, and Gilbert and Sullivan, and all kinds of very extravagantly costumed musicals and things. So it was a really diverse collection. It had letters, it had bills, it had clippings, diaries, photographs, a bit of everything. And that's like the what we had to work with. In fact, when we were applying for the grant, we looked through different possibilities of what kind of archival collection we might focus on. And we really thought that this was the one that was the richest and that also had the most connection to the community, and not just to Simmons College history, but to help document something that was beyond just the college's own history, but that connection to the West End is why we chose to focus on that. And for many of these students, it was the first time they had they had done research in archives. It's very unusual for undergraduates to do that kind of, to work with the actual letter, the originals, right? The original photos, the original diary. And so not only did they not know what a settlement was when they started, many of them had not done archival research either. And so this was like everyone's dream capstone. It was for me just such a pleasure, such a joy to introduce them to the ups and downs of research as I get to do it in my own life, and to ask questions and not know if you're going to be able to even find the answers to them, but to really revel in what we have and putting together the pieces like a puzzle. And it's very much their project, deciding what they wanted to focus on and how they wanted to arrange it. And that's why I thought it was important for them to speak for themselves today. I've seen some great comments in the chat. You compliment them, and I add that as well. I'm so proud to be part of this project and to have gotten to work with these students.
I'm going to jump in at the end there to just also say, like, our gratitude for the West End Museum and the way that you all have worked with us and like had faith in us and the students. And like, I mean, we kind of came with a proposal in September that was, half, like our proposal was let the students figure out an exhibit, and I think to have the faith in them and let them do that, like I grew up in Boston. I knew some of this history before, but I feel like I've learned so much watching their work. And then, just like think the relationship has been really great and amazing. And I just think really fruitful. So I just want to, again, thank the West End Museum for really being supportive and giving us the direction, I think, when we needed it, and letting the students do some magical things.
Yeah, well, we were obviously happy to do that, and it's been a real pleasure. It's a different, it's very different than what we're kind of used to doing, and it was really fun to have such a kind of big team involved in putting together an exhibit, and just like seeing it grow. Usually, we're kind of like see every little bit, and it was sort of fun to be half on the inside and half on the outside, seeing something grow, but letting you kind of run with it, and then coming back and saying, oh, it's going to look like this. It was very, very different, and a lot of fun for us, and we're really glad that we got to work with all of you, and of course we'll hopefully look forward to having it actually physically here at some point. But so thank you so much to everybody for coming to the event tonight. We really, really appreciate your support of the museum and of the students, and we not not to get too into it, but sometime in the next 2-ish weeks, our doors will be open again. So we'll look forward to seeing some of you then as well. Okay. Yeah, thank you everybody, and goodbye. I hope you have a great night.